Okay, so now we made it to the next section, terminating loops with a break. Now, this is going to be the last video for this section or this chapter, because the next section is so short. I'm just going to combine the two together. If you're new to the channel, you can click the link in the description and have access to this material. This curriculum is free. Anyone can use it. It doesn't cost anything. You don't have to sign up or anything for the curriculum. So without further ado, we're about to get into this section. Terminating a loop with break. JavaScript, like most programming languages, provide a mechanism for terminating a loop before it will complete otherwise. The break keyword, when used with a loop, will immediately terminate the execution of any loop program execution when it continues at the next line of code below the loop. Let me read that again. I want to make sure I didn't get jumbled up. JavaScript, like most programming languages, provide a mechanism for terminating a loop before it would complete otherwise. The break keyword, when used with a loop, would immediately terminate the execution of any loop. Program execution then continues at the next line of code below the loop. Here's an example. This loop executes 12 times for values of I from 0 to 11. During the 12th iteration, I is 11, and the condition I greater than 10 evaluates to true. For the first time an execution reaches the break statement, the loop is immediately terminated at that point. So here, we create a for loop. Let I start at 0, we assign it at 0, initialize it at 0. I is less than 42, I++. Then we have an if right here. If I is greater than 11, break. So what does that mean? Let's go a little bit further. The break statement can also be used with a while loop. Consider a situation where we are searching for a particular element in an array. We have seen that JavaScript has array methods that can carry out array searches, but many programming languages do not. We can use a while loop to say, while we have not reached the end of the array, continue iterating. We can then include a break within a conditional check. Remember that word check when you see checks within conditionals, to say, when we have found the element we are searching for, exit the loop. So here we go. So here's let numbers, and then we just have some numbers here, some random numbers. Search val, or search for value, short for search for value, the number 42. So what does that mean? We're going to be looking for the number 42. So we're creating an I, initializing it at 0. So now, if I is less than the number's length, here's the numbers. We don't know how many numbers in it, but we want everything inside of the numbers variable, which is an object. And then we write a condition here. If numbers I, because we have the I, because we created this I over here, and we're using the I right here. If numbers I, that's the condition, we're using a bracket notation, strictly equal to search value break. So if there's a number 42 in here somewhere, when we find search value and whatever is inside that in the I, the index, we want to break, stop when we get to that point. If not, we want to I++. So if this condition is true, it's going to run this particular piece of code, and it's just going to stop. Otherwise, it's just going to keep iterating through until it finds it. And if it's not there, it's going to return something back to us, letting us know it wasn't found, or it's not in that particular object. So if I is less than numbers.length, console.log, the value, search value, was located at index I. else console log the value, search value is not in the array. Remember, we're using this conditional to be able to tell us what we're looking for. So you're writing this code here to be able to handle different use cases. Now, notice that we use a while loop in this example rather than a for loop. This is because our loop variable I is used outside the loop. When we use a for loop in the way we have been, the loop variable exists only within the loop. Remember, I talked about scoping. The reason why I wasn't able to get access to the I with the bracket notation outside of the for loop is because it was only declared within a for loop. So we want to learn how to use both of these, and you want to use them both based on the use case. So understanding how they work is just going to help you make the best decision for whatever programming or programs that you're writing. So that's the end of this section. We're going to go to the final section. Choosing which loop to use. The for loop is typically used to iterate through a fixed set of values, meaning you know that it's a fixed set of values. We're not thinking of a user input because we don't know what the user is going to input, but a fixed set of values. That means a variable already has the data in it already. That can be determined before the loop executes. This is why we say that a for loop exhibits definite iteration. On the other hand, the while loop is more flexible, as we saw with the example of validating user input. Most of the time you're going to use a while loop for inputs, far as when you're trying to retrieve data or pull in data, because you just don't know what the user is going to input, because it depends on what the question that you're asking them or the prompt that you're giving them. In that case, we could not determine in advance how many times the loop will iterate. It depends entirely on the values provided. So remember the example, if we want it to be a positive number, but the user keeps putting in negative numbers, that loop, we don't know how many times they're going to do that or how many times they're going to figure out not to do that. But sometimes someone may be trying to do it to break your code. So you want to be able to catch it and we're going to talk about exceptions later on, but you got to know how to write your code to handle those type of scenarios by the user during the program execution. For this reason, a while loop is often described as indefinite iteration. We expect that eventually the condition controlling the iteration will evaluate to false, and the iteration will stop unless we have an infinite loop, which is a problem we want to avoid. While we saw that any for loop can be written as a while loop, by manually creating and updating a loop variable, it is preferable to use a for loop. So most of the time you're going to use for loops. When iterating over a collection of iterating a fixed number of times, manually updating the variable in a while loop is more work for you, the programmer, and can lead to infinite loops if not handled properly. That's the end of this section, as well as the end of the chapter. Okay, I hope these videos are helpful to get you through this chapter. Go ahead and go back and review when you have some time, or just listen to it just to kind of get it in your mind, because again, there's a lot here in this chapter, and we're starting to apply those concepts and those rules that we've been learning all the way up to this point. So again, the more you do, the more you improve. See you in the next chapter.